What if every failure you've ever faced wasn't a dead end, but a hidden doorway? Think about the last time something didn't go your way, the frustration, the doubt, maybe even the shame. Now imagine if you could strip all that away and see setbacks for what they truly are, raw material for growth. That's the power of Stoicism, an ancient philosophy that turns stumbling blocks into stepping stones. 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who faced war, betrayal, and unimaginable pressure, wrote these words in his private journal: "The obstacle is the way. Not around it, not in spite of it, through it." And that shift in perspective changes everything. This isn't about gritting your teeth and enduring life's blows. It's about rewiring how you see challenges altogether. Picture a blacksmith hammering molten metal. What looks like destruction is actually the process of forging something stronger. Stoicism teaches us to become that blacksmith, shaping our failures into tools for resilience, clarity, and even wisdom. And here's the most liberating part: you don't have to wait for luck or circumstances to change. The transformation starts in your mind with simple but profound tactics that turn setbacks into fuel. Today, we're diving into 24 Stoic practices that do exactly that. These aren't abstract ideas, they're battle-tested strategies used by philosophers, leaders, and everyday people to reframe adversity as advantage. You'll learn how to disarm criticism before it stings, find opportunity in rejection, and even use your darkest moments as catalysts for reinvention. By the end of this, failure won't feel like something to avoid. It'll feel like a teacher, a guide, maybe even an old friend. So if you're ready to see your struggles in a whole new light, let's begin. The first Stoic tactic is also one of the most liberating: the dichotomy of control. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks, each labeled with things like "what people think of me" or "whether I get that promotion." Heavy, right? Now picture setting down every rock that isn't yours to carry. That's what the Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught 2,000 years ago when he said, "Some things are within our power while others are not." Your opinions, your actions, your effort, those belong in your hands. The weather, other people's choices, the stock market, those go straight back on the shelf. Take job rejection, a universal sting. The Stoic approach doesn't pretend it doesn't hurt. Instead, it asks what part of this was truly yours to control. You polished your resume, rehearsed answers, showed up prepared. That was your domain. The hiring manager's mood, the company's secret budget cuts, or that internal candidate you didn't know about. None of those were ever in your grip. The moment you stop tying your worth to the uncontrollable, rejection stops being a verdict and becomes mere data. Here's a challenge: grab your phone or a notebook and list 3 recent frustrations. Now cross out anything that wasn't truly up to you. Feel that lightness. That's the weight of the world slipping off your shoulders. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, reminding himself that even as emperor, he couldn't control treason or plagues, only his response. That shift isn't passive, it's the ultimate power move. When you stop fighting waves you can't calm, you start steering your boat with both hands free. Now let's talk about a Stoic practice that sounds counterintuitive at first, but is astonishingly powerful: Premeditatio Malorum, or the premeditation of evils. Picture this: instead of dreading a job interview or a difficult conversation, you close your eyes and deliberately imagine everything going wrong. The interviewer scowls halfway through your answers. Your voice shakes, you blank on the easiest question. Why would anyone do that? Because Seneca, one of history's greatest Stoic thinkers, didn't just wait for disaster to strike, he rehearsed it. Here's the twist: this isn't pessimism, it's emotional armor. Modern culture tells us to avoid negative thoughts at all costs, scroll past bad news, mute uncomfortable topics, drown doubts in distractions. But Seneca knew that what we refuse to confront controls us. By visualizing failure upfront, you strip it of its surprise and its sting, the interviewer's scowl. You've already seen it in your mind and practiced responding with calm clarity. Your shaky voice, you've mentally rehearsed steadying your breath. Try this for 5 minutes today. Pick one fear you've been sidestepping. Maybe it's a hard conversation with a loved one or the possibility of a project flopping. Now walk through the worst-case scenario in vivid detail. But here's the Stoic key. Don't stop at the disaster. Imagine your finest response. How would the calmest, wisest version of you handle it? Write that script in your mind. When you do this, something remarkable happens. The fear that once loomed like a monster starts looking like a drill, something that prepares you rather than paralyzes you. Marcus Aurelius took this further. He didn't just imagine professional setbacks, he visualized losing his wealth, his reputation, even his life. Sounds extreme, but here's what he discovered. Once you realize you can endure the worst, what's left to fear? That's why Stoics don't just survive adversity, they caught it in their minds to build resilience. So ask yourself, what's that one shadow you've been afraid to turn and face? Because once you do, you'll find it's not a wall, it's a doorway. Here's a philosophy so radical it might change how you see every disappointment in your life. Amor Fati, Latin for love of fate. Picture this, you're hiking and take a wrong turn. Instead of cursing your mistake, you stumble upon a hidden waterfall. That's Amor Fati in action, not just accepting what happens, but embracing it. The Stoics didn't merely tolerate setbacks, they believed everything, even the toughest blows, served a purpose. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly in his journal, "The impediment to action advances action." What stands in the way becomes the way, but here's where it gets even more powerful. Centuries later, the philosopher Nietzsche took this Stoic idea and dialed it up. He didn't just recommend accepting fate, he insisted we fall in love with it. Imagine your life as a river. A rock in the stream doesn't ruin the water's path. It shapes its flow, creating eddies and currents that wouldn't exist otherwise. That's how Nietzsche saw adversity, not as something to resent, but as the very thing that gives your journey its unique texture and strength. So how do you practice this? Start small. Think of a recent frustration, maybe a missed deadline or a friendship that faded. Now ask yourself, what did this make space for? That delayed project might have forced you to improve your time management. The lost friend, perhaps it revealed who truly stays during tough times. The Stoics called this the art of turning obstacles upside down. Even Marcus, ruling an empire plagued by wars and plagues, wrote, "Like a roasted lamb, so too these things must be accepted, not with resignation, but with the recognition that every challenge seasons us." Here's your challenge. Pick one disappointment from this week and write down 3 ways it might have secretly served you. Did it teach patience? Reveal a boundary? Redirect you somewhere better? This isn't about pretending hurt doesn't exist, it's about spotting the gold dust in the rubble. Because when you stop fighting reality and start partnering with it, you unlock a freedom few ever taste, the ability to thrive because of life's twists, not in spite of them. Ever notice how writing down a problem suddenly makes it feel smaller? That's not just a trick of the mind, it's science, and the Stoics knew this 2,000 years ago. Take Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome during wars, plagues, and betrayals. His secret weapon wasn't an army or a treasury, it was a journal. That leather-bound notebook, later called Meditations, wasn't filled with grand plans or victories. It chronicled his doubts, his mistakes, and how he used Stoic principles to rise above them. Today, psychologists call this expressive writing, and studies show it reduces stress, boosts problem-solving, and even strengthens resilience. But here's the Stoic twist. It's not about venting. It's about transforming chaos into clarity. Here's how to journal like Marcus Aurelius in 3 steps. First, observation. Describe the failure with cold, hard facts, like a scientist taking notes. No, they ruined everything, or I'm such a failure. just the client rejected the proposal after 2 rounds of edits. Next, apply a Stoic principle. Ask, what would Epictetus say about this? Maybe, external events don't define me, my response does. Finally, craft an action plan. If the proposal failed, was the research thin? Schedule time to improve those skills. Notice what's missing: blame, excuses, drama. This isn't diary writing, it's mental alchemy, turning leaden setbacks into golden insights. Try this tonight. Grab a notebook and write about one recent stumble, but with 2 rules. No villains, not even yourself, and no victimhood. Just facts, wisdom, and forward motion. A Harvard study found that people who journaled this way for 15 minutes a day developed thicker prefrontal cortices, the brain's resilience center. Marcus didn't know neuroscience, but he knew this. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Your pen is your chisel, and every honest word chips away at the illusion that failure owns you. There's a reason astronauts who see Earth from space often return with a radically changed outlook. Distance reshapes what matters. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who advised emperors, had a similar practice 2,000 years ago, long before spaceflight. He called it the view from above, and it's one of the most powerful ways to dissolve the drama of daily setbacks. Here's how it works. When failure hits, close your eyes and pull your perspective back, way back. See your struggle not from your chair or your room, but from the clouds, higher still, until cities become dots and centuries blur together. From there, that missed promotion or embarrassing mistake looks different, doesn't it? Modern psychology echoes this with temporal distancing, asking, will this matter in 5 years? But the Stoics went further. They didn't just zoom out in time, they expanded the frame to cosmic proportions. Picture 2 farmers in ancient Rome arguing over a boundary line between their fields. From ground level, it's a life or death dispute, but from a mountaintop, their land is a single patch of green. From space, not even visible, that's the gift of perspective. It doesn't erase pain, but it reveals its true scale. Try this today. Think of a current worry, maybe a project that failed or a harsh comment that stung. Now fast forward to your 80th birthday. Would you even remember this moment? Better yet, imagine a historian 500 years from now sifting through digital archives. Would your setback make their timeline? Probably not. But here's what does last: the strength you built by navigating it. That's why Marcus Aurelius wrote, think of the substance of the whole, what a speck is yours. Not to diminish your experience, but to remind you that within the vastness, you still get to choose how to fill your tiny, precious slice of existence. This practice isn't about dismissing emotions, it's about anchoring them in something steadier. When NASA Apollo astronauts saw Earth as a fragile blue marble against the void, many reported overwhelming calm. They called it the overview effect. Your version might happen at a park bench or your kitchen window. The point is to regularly step outside the cramped theater of your immediate struggles and remember you're part of a story far grander than today's scene. So next time failure weighs heavy, borrow Seneca's telescope. The view might just lighten your load. What if every obstacle wasn't just something to overcome, but the actual path forward? That's the core of Ryan Holiday's modern take on an ancient Stoic principle: the obstacle is the way. Picture Cato the Younger, the Stoic senator who made Rome's corrupt politicians squirm. When they exiled him from politics, he didn't slink away defeated. He turned exile into education, returning with sharper arguments and deeper convictions. His enemies meant to silence him instead. They gave him time to hone his philosophy into a weapon. This flips conventional thinking on its head. Most of us see roadblocks as signs to stop or detour. Stoics see them as the trail markers themselves. Think of Thomas Edison's famous line about inventing the light bulb. I didn't fail, I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work. That's not just optimism, it's tactical reframing. Each failure wasn't a dead end, it was data narrowing the path to success. Here's the crucial difference between dead-end thinking and obstacle as the way thinking. Dead-end thinking says, because I failed, I can't. Obstacle thinking asks, because I failed, what can I do now? When Twitter rejected Biz Stone's early ideas, he didn't quit. He realized those rejections were pointing him toward a simpler, better platform. That pivot became Twitter. When J.K. Rowling faced 12 publisher rejections, she used the waiting time to refine Harry Potter's world building. The obstacle rejection forced depth that made the series legendary. Your turn. Pick one current hurdle: a rejected proposal, a strained relationship, a missed deadline. Now shift the question from "Why is this happening to me?" to "What is this making possible?" Maybe that rejected proposal frees you to pursue a bolder idea. Perhaps the strained relationship reveals which bridges are worth rebuilding. The Stoics called this turning the impediment upside down. Like a judo master using an opponent's momentum against them, you learn to leverage the weight of the obstacle itself. Marcus Aurelius faced this daily. As emperor, he could have seen the Germanic tribes invading Rome's borders as pure threats. Instead, his journals show he viewed them as training grounds for his patience, for his strategy, even for his character. "The fire hardens the sword," he wrote, "the obstacle strengthens the will." So tomorrow, when you hit that inevitable snag, don't just endure it, interrogate it. Ask what skills it's demanding you develop, what alternatives it's nudging you toward, because the obstacle isn't in your way, it is the way. Now consider this: the word crisis in Chinese is written with two characters, one meaning danger, the other meaning opportunity. The Stoics would nod in agreement. Every setback holds that same dual nature. Your job isn't to avoid the storm, but to learn the art of sailing in it. When IBM lost the personal computer market in the 80s, they pivoted to consulting and cloud services, now their core business. When Starbucks initially failed in Australia, they studied local coffee culture intensely, retooled their approach, and eventually thrived. The obstacle showed them what they needed to see. Here's a challenge. Take that same hurdle you identified earlier and give it 24 hours. Don't resist it, study it. What hidden door might it be pointing to? Just as Cotto used exile to fortify his philosophy, just as Edison used failures to refine his filament, you'll start spotting advantages where others see only dead ends. Because history's greatest innovators, leaders, and thinkers share one trait: they didn't just overcome obstacles, they let obstacles sculpt them. Negative visualization isn't about dwelling on disaster, it's about waking up to the gifts already in your hands. Seneca put it bluntly: what fortune has made yours is not your own. The roof over your head, the people who love you, even the simple ability to take a deep breath without pain, none of it is guaranteed. But here's the magic trick the Stoics mastered. By consciously imagining life without these things, you don't breed fear, you ignite gratitude. Picture a sailor who spent months at sea, rationing stale biscuits. When he finally bites into a fresh apple, that flavor isn't just sweet, it's sacred. That's the power of negative visualization. It turns ordinary comforts into visceral gifts. Try this tonight. Before you flick off the bedside lamp, ask yourself, how could today have been harder? Maybe your morning coffee spilled, but what if the power had been out entirely, leaving you without heat? The barista got your order wrong, but what if there were no coffee shops at all, like in Seneca's Rome? This isn't morbid, it's perspective alchemy. Modern research backs this. People who practice gratitude exercises show higher emotional resilience and even stronger immune responses. The Stoics were doing cognitive behavioral therapy 2 millennia before it had a name. Seneca took it further. In one letter, he told his friend to periodically sleep on the floor, wear rough clothing, and eat plain bread. Why? Not to punish himself, but to recalibrate his baseline. set aside a certain number of days to eat only the cheapest food, he wrote, and say to yourself, is this the condition I feared? When you voluntarily touch discomfort, you rob adversity of its shock value. It's why Navy SEAL train in freezing water and sleep deprivation, not because missions require it, but because when real chaos hits, their nervous systems whisper, "We've been here before." Here's your challenge. Pick one convenience you barely notice: running water, Wi-Fi, the fact that grocery stores are stocked. Now spend 60 seconds vividly imagining its absence. Feel the frustration of hand-washing clothes in a river, the isolation of no internet, the hunger of empty shelves. When you snap back to reality, that mundane privilege won't feel mundane anymore. Marcus Aurelius did this daily, reminding himself that even his imperial robes were just sheep's hair dyed in shellfish blood. Strip away the labels, and what's left is the raw gift of existence itself. The twist: this practice doesn't just deepen gratitude, it sharpens creativity. When Tim Ferriss faced a business crisis, he didn't just brainstorm solutions. He asked, what if I lost everything tomorrow? That mental demolition revealed unexpected lifelines, skills he could monetize, friendships he could lean on. By preemptively losing his assets, he discovered they weren't really assets at all, they were decorations. His true wealth was his adaptable mind. That stoic negative visualization at its highest level, not just preparing for storms, but realizing you're the sailor, not the ship. The vessel might splinter, but the hands on the ropes, those are yours to train. So next time you're stuck in traffic or staring at a disappointing bank balance, flip the script. That traffic jam means you own a car, a luxury most of humanity still dreams of. That bank balance, it represents choices unavailable to those living paycheck to paycheck. As Seneca wrote while exiled to Corsica, no man enjoys what he has unless he's prepared to lose it. Taste your food like it might be your last meal. Hold your loved ones like the world might pull them away tomorrow. Not with fear, but with fierce, present-moment reverence. Because when you stop assuming the light will always turn green, every intersection becomes a chance to pause and marvel that it's green at all. Imagine standing in a vast forest after a storm. Broken branches litter the ground, some trees lean precariously. It looks like chaos, but step closer. Those fallen logs are becoming nurseries for new seedlings. The gaps in the canopy let sunlight reach plants that haven't tasted it in years. What seemed like destruction is actually the forest's way of renewing itself. This is sympatheia, the Stoic concept of interconnectedness, and it transforms how we see our stumbles. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we're like individual leaves on a great tree. When one falls, it nourishes the roots for the rest. Your failures aren't isolated events. They ripple through the lives around you in ways you can't yet see. Take modern systems thinking in ecology or business. When a beaver dam collapses, it doesn't just ruin one animal's home, it creates wetlands that support entire ecosystems. When a startup fails, its team scatters into new ventures, carrying hard-won lessons that spawn fresh innovations. The founder of Airbnb credits their early struggles, like selling cereal boxes to fund their failing platform, with teaching them resourcefulness that later saved the company. That cereal stunt, it became part of Silicon Valley lore, inspiring other entrepreneurs to think creatively in crises. Here's the pivotal question Stoics would ask: how might this failure serve someone else's growth? Maybe your public speaking flop becomes a cautionary tale that saves a colleague from similar mistakes. Perhaps that rejected manuscript collects feedback that reshapes it into a guidebook for aspiring writers. Even personal heartbreaks, when shared honestly, can become lighthouses for friends navigating their own storms. Marcus Aurelius saw his military defeats not just as setbacks for Rome, but as tests that strengthened his soldiers' discipline for future battles. Try this reframe today. Pick one recent setback and trace its invisible threads. Did losing that client free you to mentor a junior coworker who's now thriving? Did that failed diet attempt help you discover a food sensitivity that's improving your family's health? Systems thinkers call this emergence, the unexpected value that surfaces when individual pieces interact. The Stoics called it living according to nature's logic. Either way, it's a reminder that no effort is ever wasted. Like a stone dropped in a pond, your struggles send out waves you may never see, but they're shaping shores somewhere. When the Wright brothers' early prototypes crashed, those wrecks didn't just advance aviation, they inspired entire communities. Local mechanics offered tweaks. Children who witnessed the failures grew up to become engineers. One boy who watched those shaky flights was Charles Lindbergh. Decades later, he'd credit the Wrights' very public struggles with fueling his own transatlantic ambition. Your setbacks might be silently doing the same, inspiring a sibling, a stranger, or even your future self. As Marcus scribbled in his journal between battles, what's bad for the hive is bad for the bee. But the reverse is also true. Every time you rise from a fall, you're not just healing yourself, you're adding strength to the whole human hive. There's a gym for your mind, and its equipment looks nothing like dumbbells or treadmills. The Stoics called it voluntary discomfort, deliberately choosing small hardships to fortify your resilience. Picture Cato the Younger, the Stoic statesman who'd wear thin robes in winter and walk barefoot on rough roads. His contemporaries thought he was showing off. They missed the point entirely. He wasn't punishing himself, he was inoculating himself against life's inevitable shocks. Modern science now confirms what the Stoics knew. Brief, controlled stressors like cold exposure or fasting boost mental toughness by training your nervous system to stay calm under pressure. Start with something as simple as a cold shower. That first icy blast triggers the same panic response as a sudden setback. Your heart races, your muscles tense. But here's the magic. When you stay in it, breath steady, you're not just enduring discomfort, you're rewiring your brain's relationship with adversity. Neuroscientists call this stress inoculation. Just as vaccines introduce weakened viruses to build immunity, voluntary hardship teaches your mind, this isn't an emergency, just discomfort I can handle. Modern leaders from athletes to CEOs use versions of this. Twitter's Jack Dorsey famously spent years taking ice baths and walking 5 miles to work meetings, not because he had to, but because he wanted to stay comfortable being uncomfortable. But you don't need extreme challenges to start. Try a 24-hour tech fast, no social media, no streaming, no endless scrolling. Notice the itch to reach for your phone, the boredom gnawing at you. That's the mental equivalent of a runner's burning muscles. Your strengthening focus muscles atrophied by constant distraction. The Stoics believed luxury was a trap. It narrows your comfort zone until minor inconveniences feel like crises. Seneca ate stale bread for days to remind himself, poverty isn't lacking things, it's craving them. Here's why small discomforts matter. They reveal hidden dependencies. When you skip that morning coffee or take the stairs instead of the elevator, you uncover all the invisible crutches propping up your daily calm. Epictetus, born a slave, knew this better than anyone. He'd say, if you want to test a ship's strength, don't wait for a storm, rocket yourself in calm waters. Your version might be walking in the rain without an umbrella or writing a handwritten letter instead of texting. Each act proves to your subconscious, I can handle more than I thought. Military training harnesses this principle. Navy SEAL aren't thrown into combat unprepared. They endure Hell Week, where sleepless nights and freezing swims simulate battlefield stress. The goal isn't to break them, but to show them their breaking point lies far beyond what they imagined. You don't need Hell Week, but you can design your own micro-Spartan challenge. Skip the heater one chilly morning, take the crowded bus instead of driving. These aren't sacrifices, they're rehearsals for life's bigger disruptions. The ultimate payoff: when real adversity hits, a job loss, a health scare, a betrayal, you won't collapse. You'll recall that time you sat with discomfort by choice and think, "I've been here before." Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire during plague and war, still slept on the ground some nights, not because his palace lacked beds, but because he knew the cucumber is bitter. Then throw it away. There are brambles in your path, then go around. That's all you need to know. Voluntary discomfort teaches you to taste life's bitterness without gagging, and spot the paths around thorns before they draw blood. Death isn't morbid, it's the ultimate deadline. The Stoics called this Memento Mori, Latin for remember you must die. But this wasn't about fear, it was about focus. Seneca wrote his most piercing letters after exile, realizing mortality turns failure from a stop sign into a detour. Picture sand slipping through an hourglass. Each grain is a moment you'll never get back. Now imagine holding that hourglass after a career setback or a rejection. Suddenly, the question isn't why me, but what now? Consider two people facing the same failed business venture. One obsesses over lost money for years, paralyzed by regret. The other, armed with Memento Mori, asks, if I only have 10 summers left, is this how I want to spend them? That shift doesn't erase the sting, but it burns away self-pity. Steve Jobs knew this. After his pancreatic cancer diagnosis, he told Stanford graduates, death is life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. His failed NXT computer venture looked different through that lens, not as an ending, but as a stepping stone to Pixar and his triumphant return to Apple. Here's the paradox: confronting life's brevity doesn't shrink your ambitions, it sharpens them. A study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that people who visualize their own mortality make bolder career choices and waste less time on trivial conflicts. The Stoics were running this experiment 2,000 years earlier. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." Not as a threat, but as a tuning fork vibrating at the frequency of urgency. Try this today. Pull up your calendar and highlight one upcoming commitment in red. Now ask, if this were my last week, would this still earn a spot? Not every task will fail the test. Some drudgery still serves bigger goals, but you'll uncover startling truths. That grudge you're nursing suddenly seems like a waste of heartbeats. That someday project you keep delaying takes on new weight. Seneca nailed it when he said we all act like immortals, saving our best for a future that isn't promised. Procrastination thrives in the illusion of endless time. Memento Mori shatters that illusion. Take J.R.R. Tolkien. He nearly abandoned The Lord of the Rings after rejections and wartime paper shortages. What kept him writing? A visceral awareness that middle age could be his last creative peak. He scribbled in a letter, "Time doesn't stop, even for hobbits." Your version might be simpler, the realization that your worst failures won't matter on your deathbed, but your unlived dreams might. So here's your challenge. Tonight, place one object on your nightstand: a seashell, an expired license, a withered flower, as your memento mori. When morning comes, let it reframe your first setback. That awkward conversation, just one of 80,000 you'll have in a lifetime. That missed opportunity, a single brushstroke in a vast mural. Death isn't waiting at the end, it's walking beside you, whispering, "Make this count." And suddenly, failure stops being something to fear and becomes proof you're playing the game at all. The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, honoring its cracks as part of its history. Memento Mori does the same for your stumbles. Each one becomes precious not in spite of your limited time, but because of it. As Seneca wrote while grieving his own lost years, it's not that we have too little time, we waste much of it. So next time you fall, let mortality's quiet whisper lift you. You're alive, you get to try again. Now what will you do with that gift? Imagine your mind is a theater, and your emotions are actors on stage, dramatic, intense, demanding attention. Now imagine stepping into the projection booth instead, watching the performance from a distance. That's cognitive distancing, a Stoic superpower Epictetus taught 2,000 years ago. He didn't say, "Don't feel," he said, "Don't be owned by what you feel." Modern therapists call this metacognition, the ability to observe your thoughts like clouds passing, rather than storms you're trapped inside. Here's how it works in practice. When failure hits, instead of thinking, "I'm so stupid for messing up," try, "I notice I'm having the thought that I'm stupid." That tiny shift, adding "I notice," creates space between you and the emotion. Psychologists use this in cognitive behavioral therapy to treat anxiety, but Epictetus was scripting the technique in 1st century Greece. He told his students, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." Labeling emotions as external observations is like turning down the volume on your inner critic. Try this with a recent setback. Write about it in 3rd person, as if you're a journalist covering someone else's story. The project manager received critical feedback on the presentation. Her chest tightened, but she noted the reaction without judgment. Suddenly, the event isn't you, it's data to analyze. Studies show this simple reframe reduces emotional intensity by activating the brain's problem-solving regions. When NASA engineers debrief after failed launches, they don't scream, "We're failures." They coldly analyze telemetry readings. That's cognitive distancing in action, turning heat into light. Marcus Aurelius mastered this. Amid palace intrigues and wars, he'd jot in his journal, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to its acting." Translation: I see the fear, but I'm not the fear. Modern athletes use versions of this. After a missed penalty kick, soccer stars like Cristiano Ronaldo don't think, "I choked." They review the footage objectively: foot placement, approach angle, separating the emotion from the mechanics. Your challenge today: pick one nagging regret and describe it like a biographer would. Not "I embarrassed myself at the meeting," but "the consultant's joke fell flat," triggering a wave of self-doubt he acknowledged before refocusing. See how the sting lessens when you're the narrator, not the protagonist. Epictetus knew this was the secret to resilience. Don't let the force of an impression when it first hits you knock you off your feet. Say to it, "Hold on, let me see who you are." That pause, that split second of distancing, is where your power lies. Now imagine applying this to future stumbles, that upcoming tough conversation. Instead of dreading it, script it like a play. She anticipates tension when discussing the budget, observing her palms sweating without resistance. Cognitive distancing isn't cold detachment, it's the opposite. By seeing emotions as temporary weather patterns, you gain the clarity to navigate through them. Psychologist Stephen Hayes puts it bluntly, "You aren't your thoughts any more than the sky is the clouds." Here's the twist: this practice doesn't just ease pain, it reveals hidden insights. When novelist Toni Morrison received harsh criticism, she didn't internalize it. She'd type the critiques verbatim, then analyze them like an archaeologist examining artifacts. Often, she discovered valid gems buried in the venom. That's Stoic cognitive distancing at its best, turning criticism into a sieve, catching gold while letting the silt wash away. So next time failure floods your system, don't drown in it. Step onto the riverbank and watch the currents. Name them: anxiety, shame, doubt, like a scientist labeling specimens. As Epictetus reminded his students, "You are not your body, nor your sensations. These are just the cloak and the sheath. Your true self is the reason observing them." That observation, that's where growth begins. Ever notice how a spark can flare into a wildfire in seconds? That first lurch of anger when someone cuts you off, the hot rush of shame after a mistake, those initial jolts feel instant. But here's the secret Epictetus uncovered 2,000 years ago. Between what happens and how you react, there's a sliver of space. The Stoics called it the first movement, that raw, involuntary flash of emotion. The key isn't to deny it exists, it's to refuse to let it dictate what comes next. Picture a master swordsman parrying a strike. The blade coming at him isn't a choice, but his countermove. That's pure artistry. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight. When your boss criticizes your work or your partner snaps at you, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires within milliseconds. But your prefrontal cortex, the rational commander, takes a full 10 seconds to engage. Those 10 seconds are your stoic pause, your chance to intercept the knee-jerk reaction before it becomes regret. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi camps, put it perfectly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. Here's how to claim that power. Next time you feel that first surge of emotion, don't act count. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. That 12-second rhythm isn't just calming, it's a neurological hack. It forces oxygen into your prefrontal cortex, literally lighting up your brain's decision-making circuits. Navy SEAL use this under gunfire. CEOs use it during boardroom battles, and you can use it when your teenager rolls their eyes or an email lands like a grenade. Epictetus trained his students to spot their first movements like a hawk spotting prey. Say you spill coffee on your shirt before a big meeting, the flush of frustration. That's the first movement, natural, automatic, but cursing, slamming the cup down, or letting it ruin your morning, those are second movements, and they're where your power lies. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing, "The first step, don't be panicked. The second, see it for what it is." Try this challenge today. Carry a tally mark in your pocket. Each time you feel provoked, a rude comment, a delayed flight, pause for 10 full seconds before responding, not to suppress the emotion but to interrogate it. Ask, is this reaction serving me? The ancient Stoics visualized their emotions as unruly dogs on leashes. That pause is you tightening your grip before the leash snaps. History's greatest peacemakers mastered this gap. When Mahatma Gandhi was struck by a British officer, he didn't strike back or crumble. He stood still, letting that silence speak louder than any retaliation. He later wrote, "My silence isn't weakness, it's the space where strength gathers." Your pause might not change world history, but it will change your inner world. Every unsent angry text, every deep breath before a sarcastic remark is a victory over chaos. Here's the paradox: the more you practice pausing, the more you'll notice those first movements lose their fangs. Like a fire deprived of oxygen, they flicker out faster. Seneca, who advised the volatile Emperor Nero, knew this intimately. He wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." Not denial, not avoidance, just the simple, revolutionary act of waiting 10 heartbeats, because in that pause, you're no longer a reactor. You become an alchemist, turning leaden impulses into golden choices. So next time life swings at you, remember, the power isn't in the punch. It's in the breath you take before deciding how to block it. We live in a world that keeps score: bank balances, job titles, social media likes. But imagine if none of that mattered, not in a naive way, but in a deeply radical one. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus put it bluntly, "What good is wealth if you sacrifice your principles to get it?" This is the 13th tactic, virtue as the sole good, and it turns failure on its head. When you anchor your worth not to outcomes but to character, setbacks stop being catastrophes. They become tests of what can never be taken from you: your integrity. Take 2 salespeople. One lands a huge deal by lying about product capabilities, a short-term win that erodes trust. The other loses the contract by refusing to mislead, a failure that actually strengthens their reputation over time. Society applauds the first, pities the second. Stoics would reverse that judgment entirely. As Epictetus said, "No thief can steal your moral purpose, that client you lost because you wouldn't cut corners." That's not a loss, it's proof your compass still points true. Here's the litmus test after any failure. Ask, did this compromise who I am? A rejected manuscript hurts, but if you wrote truthfully, your voice remains uncorrupted. A fired employee stings, but if you led with fairness, your dignity stays intact. Marcus Aurelius faced this daily, surrounded by corrupt politicians. He wrote, "Waste no time arguing what a good person should be. Be one, not when it's convenient, not when it pays off, but especially when it costs you." Modern culture glorifies winning at all costs, but Stoics measure differently. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. The bankers who walked away rich but morally bankrupt didn't escape unscathed. They just paid in a currency society ignores: self-respect. Contrast that with Abraham Lincoln's early career, dozens of failed campaigns, yet each loss left his honesty so undeniable that rivals nicknamed him Honest Abe. Those failures became the foundation of a legacy no election could ever confer. Try this reframe today. Pick a recent loss, maybe a bid you didn't win or a friendship that faded. Now separate what was taken from what remains: the contract gone, your willingness to underdeliver, still zero; the friend distant, your loyalty when they needed you. Untouched, virtue isn't a consolation prize, it's the only prize that compounds over time. As Musonius taught, better to go hungry with integrity than feast with deceit. This isn't about dismissing pain. It's about recognizing that some wounds are superficial, they scar the surface, while others fester in the soul. The Stoic distinction between preferred indifference, wealth, status, comfort, and true goods, wisdom, courage, justice, is like distinguishing between the frame of a painting and its colors. Lose the frame, the art still exists. Fade the colors, you've lost the masterpiece itself. So next time failure knocks you down, check your hands. If they're still clean, you're not just standing, you're standing firm. Here's a thought experiment that could change how you process every failure. Imagine your best friend calls you, devastated after a breakup. Their partner said, "It's not you, it's me," then ghosted. Now what do you tell them? Probably something like, "You deserve better," or "This pain won't last forever." But here's the twist: what if you were the one just dumped? Suddenly, the script flips. Maybe I was too needy, or I'll never find someone again. That double standard isn't just unfair, it's illogical. Seneca spotted this centuries ago and devised a razor-sharp mental tool. What if this happened to someone you love? The Stoic philosopher noticed we're merciless judges of ourselves but compassionate therapists for others. So he proposed a radical shift: step outside your story and coach yourself like you would a dear friend. Neuroscience backs this. Studies show self-criticism activates the brain's threat response, flooding your system with cortisol, while self-compassion triggers the caregiving circuit, releasing oxytocin. In other words, beating yourself up isn't just painful, it's biologically counterproductive. Let's apply this to a real-world stinger: losing your job. For a friend, you'd say, "The market's brutal right now. This wasn't personal." For yourself, "I should have seen this coming." Try Seneca's flip. Write down the harsh narrative looping in your mind, then rewrite it as if consoling your sibling or best friend. That gap between the two versions, that's where your growth lies. Winston Churchill used this tactic during his wilderness years in the 1930s, when his warnings about Hitler got him labeled a fearmonger. Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, he'd ask, "What would I say to another statesman in this position?" Answer, "History will vindicate you." That external perspective fueled his resilience when Britain later needed him most. Here's why this works. Our inner critic speaks in shorthand, skipping context a friend would notice. Say you bombed a presentation. Your mind screams, "You're terrible at this." A friend would counter, "You prepared for days, the projector died, and half the audience was scrolling on their phones." Seneca's flip restores that missing context. Practice this today. Pick one recent setback, a failed diet, a rejected idea, and role-play both sides. First, voice the brutal self-talk. Then switch chairs mentally and respond as your wisest friend would. Notice how the second take isn't just kinder, it's often more accurate. Marcus Aurelius used this when rivals mocked him, writing, "If someone else can do it, why feel insulted?" The fault lies with them, not you. The magic lies in the follow-up question. What would this look like if it were happening to someone I admire? Imagine your role model faced this same rejection. Would you think less of them? Probably not. You'd admire their courage for trying. That's the hidden gift of Seneca's table turn. It reveals failures aren't proof of inadequacy, but badges of participation in the human struggle. So next time you're holding a black cloud over your own head, ask, would I hand this same storm to someone I love? The answer will light your way forward. Failure has a way of stripping life down to its bare essentials, and that's precisely where its gift lies. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher born into slavery, had a brutal but liberating practice he called the Art of Subtraction. When disaster struck, he didn't just ask, "Why me?" He asked, "What's left when everything else is gone?" Picture a tree after a hurricane. The broken branches litter the ground, but the trunk remains thicker, tougher, rooted deeper than ever. That's what failure does. It shows you what you're made of by removing everything you thought you needed. Modern minimalism echoes this ancient wisdom. When Joshua Fields Milburn lost his mother and marriage in the same month, he didn't just grieve, he purged. 80% of his possessions went to the curb. What remained wasn't just a tidier apartment, it was a clarity he'd never felt before. As he later wrote, "Losing everything showed me what everything actually was." The Stoics would nod in recognition. Epictetus taught that loss isn't the enemy, it's the chisel that carves away the excess until only the essential remains. Here's how to practice this today. After any setback, a business flop, a strained relationship, a missed goal, grab a notebook and draw 3 columns. Label them distractions, delusions, dependencies. In the first, list what pulled your focus from what truly mattered. Maybe you were so busy networking that you neglected your craft. The second column. Write down the false beliefs the failure shattered. Perhaps you thought popularity guaranteed success, only to learn real connection outlasts clout. The final column is for crutches you leaned on too hard, that investor who flaked, the algorithm you gambled on. Now comes the liberating part. Subtract. Delete 3 non-essentials this failure revealed, not as punishment but as precision. When author Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love sequel flopped, she didn't double down on celebrity. She retreated to her garden and wrote the signature of all things, a novel critics called her masterpiece. The failure had subtracted her ego, leaving only the writer she was meant to be. This isn't just philosophy, it's physiology. Swedish researchers found that people who purge clutter after crises show lower cortisol levels and sharper decision-making. Your brain, like Epictetus' teachings, thrives on essentials. When Steve Jobs returned to a nearly bankrupt Apple, he slashed 70% of products overnight. Innovation, he said, is saying no to 1,000 things. That's subtraction in action, failure distilled into focus. Try this reframe. View every setback as life's way of unpicking unnecessary stitches. That rejected manuscript, it might be stripping away derivative plots to reveal your authentic voice. The collapsed partnership, perhaps it's removing the wrong allies so the right ones can find you. Marcus Aurelius saw this in his own reign, writing, "The impediment becomes the way the fire that burns the forest also fertilizes the soil." Your challenge is simple but profound. Pick one recent stumble and ask Epictetus' razor-sharp question. What does this failure prove I can live without? Maybe it's the approval you chased, the perfectionism that paralyzed you, or the safety net that became a straitjacket. Subtract those and what remains isn't a smaller life, it's a truer one. Because when you stop carrying what wasn't meant for the journey, you'll find your hands are finally free to grasp what is. Imagine winning millions in the lottery tomorrow. The dream, right, except research tells a startling truth. Within 2 years, most lottery winners report being less happy than before their windfall. Why? Because fortune is a fickle friend, elevating expectations faster than it fulfills them. Seneca saw this trap clearly when he wrote, "Fortune gives us nothing that we can truly own." The Stoic practice of contempt for fortune isn't about rejecting wealth or success, it's about severing your happiness from outcomes you can't control. Picture a chef who only cooks for Michelin stars. The moment the guidebook snubs them, their passion curdles into bitterness. Now contrast that with a chef who cooks simply because creation itself brings joy. The second one, that stoic joy, an internal flame no critic can extinguish. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert uncovered something striking. People drastically overestimate how much external wins, promotions, fame, money will elevate their happiness long term. They call it miswanting. Meanwhile, Stoics were running the same experiment 2,000 years earlier. When Nero's court offered Seneca palaces and power, he'd periodically sleep on the floor and eat peasant food. Not to punish himself, but to prove a point. He who needs riches least enjoys them most. Modern psychologists now validate this. Studies show that once basic needs are met, additional wealth contributes almost nothing to lasting happiness. What does the Stoic triad, self-mastery, purpose, and connection, all goods no market crash can seize? So here's the provocative question. What would you pursue if success and failure carried equal weight? Not as a hypothetical, but as a litmus test for your deepest values. When composer Johann Sebastian Bach applied for a prestigious music director role and was rejected, he didn't despair. He kept writing not for fame, but because the act itself was his compass. Centuries later, those rejected works like the Brandenburg Concertos became immortal. Bach's genius wasn't just skill, it was his defiance of fortune's verdicts. Try this mental reset today. List 3 goals you're chasing. Now cross out any that rely on external validation like titles or trophies. What remains? Maybe it's the quiet satisfaction of mastering a skill, the thrill of solving problems, or the joy of creating something meaningful. That's your Stoic core. Entrepreneur Mark Cuban once admitted that after selling his first company for millions, he felt empty. It wasn't until he started building again, this time out of pure curiosity, that fulfillment followed. Seneca phrased it best: true happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. Not apathy, but liberation. The kind that lets a scientist relish the experiment regardless of the result, or a writer cherish the draft even if it's never published. Because here's the secret contempt for fortune reveals. When you stop needing the world's applause, you hear the music you were meant to play all along. And that tune, no lottery can buy it, and no failure can silence it. Think of your mind as a courtroom where every thought is a witness taking the stand. Some testify truthfully, others exaggerate or outright lie. Epictetus called this process the discipline of assent, the art of cross-examining your own impressions before accepting them as facts. In an age of viral misinformation, we fact-check headlines instinctively, yet we rarely apply that same skepticism to the stories we tell ourselves after failure. They think I'm incompetent, I'll never recover from this, it's all my fault. These aren't truths, they're unverified breaking news alerts flashing across your mental screen. Here's how it works in practice. When a setback strikes, your brain's first draft is usually sloppy journalism, sensationalized, missing context, riddled with bias. Take getting passed over for a promotion. The initial impression screams, "They don't respect me," but pause. Where's the evidence? Did the hiring manager explicitly say that, or is this an editorialized take? Epictetus warned his students, "Don't let the force of an impression sweep you away. Say to it, 'Show me your credentials.'" Modern psychology validates this ancient tool. Cognitive distortions like mind reading, assuming others' thoughts, or catastrophizing, predicting doom are just mental fake news. Behavioral therapists teach clients to challenge these cognitive errors by asking, "What would hold up in court?" That spreadsheet error didn't prove you're terrible at your job. It proved you're human. The Stoics were the original cognitive behavioral therapists, teaching us to separate the event from the narrative like a fact checker separating signal from noise. Try this today. Grab a notebook and fold the page into 2 columns. Label the left side first draft and the right verified facts. In the first column, vent freely. "That botched presentation ruined my reputation." Now switch hats to investigative journalist. Interview the facts. Did anyone actually say your reputation was damaged? Did anyone besides you even remember it a week later? Marcus Aurelius did this nightly, writing, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes the color of your thoughts." Editing your failure stories isn't denial, it's intellectual hygiene. Consider how journalists handle corrections. When the New York Times runs a factual error, they don't ignore it or trash the whole paper. They issue a transparent update and keep publishing. Your mind deserves the same standard. That project that missed its deadline, the first draft says, "I'm unreliable." The verified facts might say, 3 teammates missed their deliverables and the client changed scope twice. See how the narrative shifts when you demand receipts. History's greatest comebacks were built on this discipline. After Walt Disney's first animation studio went bankrupt, creditors called him a failure. His verified facts told a different story. He'd created a beloved character, Oswald the Rabbit, even if he'd lost the rights. That discipline of assent, rejecting the damning impression and focusing on transferable skills, led directly to Mickey Mouse. As Epictetus put it, first learn the meaning of what you say and then speak. Or in Disney's case, first verify what's true, then create anew. Your challenge is simple but profound. Next time failure whispers a damning headline in your ear, hit pause. Ask the Stoic press questions. Who benefits from this narrative? What's the primary source? Are there alternative explanations? Because the truth isn't just comforting, it's actionable. When you stop confusing impressions with verdicts, every setback becomes a story you can rewrite with wisdom instead of fear. An archer draws their bow with perfect form, back straight, breath steady, eyes locked on the target. At this moment, Cicero tells us the Stoic archer has already succeeded. Whether the arrow hits or misses isn't the point. The triumph lies in the disciplined release. This is Stoic targeting the 18th tactic, where victory isn't measured in bullseyes but in the purity of your aim. Today, we've twisted this wisdom into anxiety, judging our worth by outcomes we can't fully control. The entrepreneur who pitches flawlessly but doesn't land the deal walks away feeling like a failure. The Stoics would say she's won more than she knows. Consider the math of effort versus outcome. A quarterback can throw a perfect spiral only to have the receiver drop it. A novelist can craft a masterpiece that lands in the bargain bin. If you chain your self-worth to results, you're handing your happiness to forces beyond your command: market trends, subjective opinions, sheer luck. Epictetus framed it bluntly. In life, our first job is this: to divide and distinguish things into 2 categories. Externals I cannot control, but the choices I make with regard to them I do control. Your startup might fail because investors got spooked by a recession, but the late nights refining your prototype, the courage to pitch at all, those were yours. And no bankruptcy filing can erase them. History's greatest innovators understood this. Thomas Edison didn't celebrate the light bulb success first. He celebrated the 10,000 attempts that made it possible. Each failure was proof he'd aimed true. Or take Sarah Blakely, who spent 2 years pitching Spanx to manufacturers who laughed at her idea. She later said, "I didn't focus on being rejected. I focused on becoming the kind of person who got back up." That's the archer's mindset. The arrow might veer off course, but your job is to knock the next one with the same commitment. Here's how to practice this today. Think of a recent effort where the outcome disappointed, a project that didn't gain traction, a sale that fell through. Now separate the shot from the target. Did you prepare thoroughly, show up authentically, adapt when obstacles arose? If so, Cicero would argue you've already hit a deeper bullseye. The outer world rewards results, but the inner world, the one that dictates your peace, rewards alignment between intention and action. Your challenge is simple but profound. Celebrate one well-aimed effort from this past week. Maybe it was the thoughtful feedback you gave a colleague, even if they didn't take it. The morning you woke up early to exercise despite skipping the gym later. The Stoics called this living according to nature, not by dominating externals, but by honoring your own standards of excellence. When Marcus Aurelius sent troops into battle, he knew some would fall no matter their training. His journal reveals what he celebrated, that each soldier had sworn allegiance not to victory, but to valor. So tonight, before sleep, ask yourself, where did I aim true today? Not what did I win, but what did I commit to fully? Because the archer's secret isn't in the target's applause, it's in knowing with quiet certainty that your hands held steady when the wind blew hardest. And that kind of success, no missed shot can ever take it from you. There's a reason the phoenix has endured as a symbol across millennia, not because it avoids the flames, but because it emerges anew from them. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, experienced this firsthand when Emperor Claudius exiled him to Corsica for 8 long years. Cut off from Rome's glittering circles, banished to a rocky island, he could have crumbled. Instead, he penned some of his most profound letters, reframing exile not as punishment but as liberation. No man was ever wise by chance, he wrote from that windswept shore. His banishment became the crucible where his philosophy transformed from theory into unshakable conviction. Consider James Dyson, the inventor who spent 15 years creating 5,127 failed vacuum prototypes before landing on the design that would revolutionize an industry. Most people see those discarded models as proof of obsession. Dyson saw them as iterations, each one a stepping stone, not a dead end. When journalists asked how he persisted, he shrugged, "I didn't fail. I just found 5,126 ways not to make a vacuum cleaner." That's the Phoenix response in action, the deliberate choice to interpret collapse as compost for what comes next. Science backs this ancient Stoic insight. Researchers at Stanford studying post-traumatic growth found that people who view crises as catalysts rather than catastrophes develop heightened creativity, deeper relationships, and renewed purpose. The key isn't avoiding the fire, it's learning to rise from its ashes. When Spotify faced near bankruptcy in 2008, its founders didn't just pivot. They used the crisis to scrap their original ad-based model entirely, betting everything on a then unproven subscription system. The flames of failure forged their most innovative leap. Here's how to activate this mindset today. Grab a blank sheet of paper and draw 2 columns. Label the first, what burned, the project that stalled, the relationship that fractured, the goal that slipped away. Now, in the second column, answer, what now becomes possible? Maybe that stalled project cleared space for a bolder idea. Perhaps that fractured relationship revealed hidden strength in solitude. When author Cheryl Strayed lost her mother and marriage in her 20s, she didn't just grieve, she strapped on a backpack and hiked the Pacific Crest Trail alone. That journey birthed Wild, a memoir that would guide millions through their own darkness. As Seneca realized in exile, sometimes destruction isn't the end. It's the necessary clearing for what your soul needs to build next. The Phoenix response isn't about denying pain. It's about recognizing that the same heat that cracks clay hardens steel. When the Wright brothers' first plane designs crumpled, they didn't see broken wood, they saw data points steering them closer to flight. When Einstein's early papers were ignored, he didn't resign himself to obscurity. He refined his theories until they reshaped physics. Even nature understands this. Alchemy. Forest fires that seemed devastating actually crack open pine cones, releasing seeds that wouldn't germinate otherwise. So tonight, ask yourself Seneca's exile question. What if this isn't an ending, but the start of a sharper, truer version of my path? Not every failure will birth a vacuum empire or a best-selling memoir, but each one holds the potential to rebirth something in you. A resilience, a clarity, or a direction you couldn't have discovered any other way. The phoenix doesn't mourn its ashes, it spreads its wings. Imagine holding a flashlight in a pitch-black room where you point it determines what you can change. Stephen Covey's famous circle of influence concept has modern roots in ancient Stoicism, where Epictetus taught his students to shine their energy only where it could make a difference. After any failure, a botched presentation, a rejected proposal, a financial loss, your first instinct might be to fume about unfairness or obsess over what others should have done. But Stoics draw two circles. A large outer ring labeled concerns everything that happened, and a small, bright inner ring labeled control, what you can do next. The space between them, that's where resilience is built or wasted. Take the story of Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a POW for 7 years. In his prison cell, he realized his captors controlled the locks, the torture, the propaganda, but they couldn't force him to abandon his honor, so he focused his energy on covert communication with fellow prisoners, tapping codes through walls to keep morale alive. Years later, he'd call this the Stockdale paradox. Confront the brutal facts of your reality, but never lose faith that you can influence some part of it. The guards own the prison. Stockdale owned his defiance. Here's how this works in everyday life. Say your project gets cancelled due to budget cuts. The outer circle holds the CEO's decision, the market downturn, the timing, all real, but all beyond your reach. The inner circle, your ability to document what you learned, nurture relationships with teammates, or even repurpose your work for another initiative. Complaining about the cuts burns energy. Updating your portfolio builds tomorrow's opportunities. The Stoics didn't ignore external hardships. They just refused to spend their limited power where it wouldn't move the needle. Try this exercise today. Grab a blank sheet of paper and draw your own circles after a recent setback. In the outer ring, list all the factors you couldn't control. The rude comment from a colleague, the rain that ruined your outdoor event, the algorithm that buried your post. Now, in the inner circle, jot every action you can take, crafting a polite response to that colleague, creating a backup plan for next year's event, studying platform trends to adapt your content. The moment your pen shifts from the outer to the inner circle, you'll feel it, a transfer of power from what's happened to what you can do. Modern psychology confirms this ancient practice. Research shows that people who focus on their circle of influence after failures report higher motivation and faster recovery times. Why? Because the brain treats actionable steps as antidotes to helplessness. When Spotify's founders faced rejection from major record labels, they didn't waste energy lamenting the industry's resistance. They pivoted to indie artists, proving their model with scrappy wins that eventually forced the giants to take notice. The twist: your circle of influence often expands when you stop straining against its edges. Think of a farmer in a drought. She can't command rain, but she can innovate irrigation, diversify crops, or collaborate with neighbors. By pouring effort into the inner circle, she sometimes nudges the outer one, just as consistent advocacy can eventually shift policies, or relentless skill building can override initial rejections. Marcus Aurelius modeled this during Rome's plague. focusing not on stopping the disease single-handedly, but on organizing aid and stabilizing morale where he could. Tonight, pick one lingering frustration and dissect it through Stoic circles. Ask, where did I spend energy outside my control this week? Then, redirect just one of those ounces of effort inward. A single email, a 10-minute skill drill, a quiet moment of recalibration. Because here's the secret Epictetus knew: the smaller your focus, the greater your power, not by shrinking your ambitions, but by targeting your strength where it actually counts. There's a reason athletes watch footage of their heroes before big games. The mind absorbs modeled behavior like a sponge. Now imagine applying that to failure. Not by scrolling motivational quotes, but by summoning the council of history's greatest Stoics as your personal advisory board. This is Tactic 21, the Stoic Mentor, and it turns setbacks into masterclasses by asking one revolutionary question: how would Marcus Aurelius handle this? Picture your latest stumble through the eyes of the philosopher king who governed Rome through plague and war without losing his composure. Or draft a letter from Seneca, the exiled mentor who turned personal catastrophes into timeless wisdom. The answers won't just reframe your struggle, they'll rewrite your playbook. History's luminaries have long used this mental hack. Benjamin Franklin kept a journal where he'd posed dilemmas to an imaginary Socrates, debating his responses. Naval officer James Stockdale, imprisoned in Vietnam, mentally channeled Epictetus, another Stoic who'd endured slavery, asking, what would Epictetus do if his cell door never opened? That nightly dialogue forged resilience no torturer could crack. Modern psychology validates this. Studies on mental contrasting show that visualizing a wiser version of yourself navigating challenges boosts problem-solving skills by up to 30%. The ancients didn't have MRI scans, but they knew this truth. We grow most when guided by those who have walked further down the path. Here's how to activate your own Stoic counsel. First, frame your failure as a letter to Seneca. Detail the setback, the missed promotion, the creative block, the relationship strain, then pause. Now switch roles. Channel Seneca's voice, forged in exile and political turmoil, as he replies, "You call this adversity? Let me tell you of Corsica's cliffs, where I learned true wealth isn't in Rome's palaces, but in the mind's unshackled freedom." His perspective won't trivialize your pain, it'll reveal its hidden curriculum. When author Ryan Holiday faced a publishing rejection, he asked, what would Marcus write in his journal tonight? The answer came, this isn't an obstacle to your writing, it's the whetstone sharpening it. The rejection became the seed of his next bestseller. For sharper insights, interrogate Epictetus. His teachings cut like a surgeon's scalpel. Is this failure within your control? No, then why torment yourself? When a startup founder loses funding, that question separates actionable grief from fruitless rumination. Or summon Musonius Rufus, the Stoic who taught that hardship is education disguised as punishment. What lesson is this failure trying to teach that comfort never could? These conversations aren't escapism, they're time-traveling mentorship. Try this tonight. Pick one current struggle and stage a dinner party in your mind. Invite Marcus, Seneca, and Epictetus. Watch how Marcus, who buried 8 children and still ruled an empire, focuses on what endures. Observe Seneca, who turned exile into literature, reframing isolation as creative fuel. Listen as Epictetus, the former slave, reminds you, circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him. Their collective verdict won't erase the sting, but it will arm you with something far more powerful, the certainty that you're not the first to face this, nor will you be the last to rise from it. The beauty of this practice, you're not borrowing wisdom, you're awakening it within yourself. When Eleanor Roosevelt's confidence wavered, she'd ask, what would my wisest self do? That version was already there, waiting. Your Stoic mentors aren't relics, they're mirrors reflecting the resilience you've carried all along. So next time failure whispers you can't, let Epictetus answer, do you only walk when the ground is smooth? The path may be rugged, but the guides are eternal, and their voices grow louder every time you listen. Think of the tightest fist you've ever clenched, how exhaustion sets in when you refuse to release. That's what happens when we confuse control with power. The 20-second Stoic tactic flips this instinct on its head. True mastery lies not in commanding the uncontrollable, but in steering your response to it. Picture a sailboat battling a storm. The captain who screams at the wind wastes energy. The one who trims the sails harnesses it. Ancient Stoics were the original sailors of the psyche, understanding earlier than most that you'll never calm the sea, but you can always adjust your rigging. Modern stress science confirms this. Studies show that people who focus on their response to chaos report 23% lower cortisol levels than those fixated on changing circumstances. Consider the blackout that cancelled your big presentation. The outage wasn't yours to command, but how you used that sudden quiet, that was your canvas. Maybe you scribbled refinements on paper by flashlight, or built rapport with stranded attendees. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin uncovered this pattern in Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War. With generals ignoring orders and newspapers mocking him, he couldn't control their actions, but his daily adjustments included writing measured rebuttals that would later define his legacy. As Epictetus observed, we can't choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. The paradox, that choice is the only control that never slips through your fingers. Neuroplasticity research reveals why this works. When you consciously redirect focus from frustration to adjustment, you strengthen neural pathways in the prefrontal cortex, your brain's sail trimming center. It's why Navy SEAL train to control the controllable during hellish drills. If your boots are filling with water, worrying about the storm won't help, but tightening your laces might save your life. Entrepreneur Sarah Blakely embodied this when her Spanx samples were rejected by manufacturers. She couldn't force them to say yes, so she adjusted her sails, hand-sewing prototypes herself until production became unavoidable. Your turn. Grab a coin and assign one side to wind uncontrollables and the other to sails responses. Flip it for today's frustrations. Boss took credit for your idea. That's the wind side, documenting contributions moving forward. That's your sail adjustment. Marcus Aurelius practiced this amid betrayals, writing, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Not resignation, redirection. The twist, this skill compounds. Like a sailor who's weathered squalls, each conscious adjustment prepares you for rougher seas ahead. When psychologist Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz, he noted that while the Nazis controlled his body, his mind's sails remained his. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude. So tonight, ask not how to calm the storm, but how to set your sails differently tomorrow, because control was never about the wind. It's about the hand on the tiller and the wisdom to know the difference. A single acorn holds no clue it's destined to become a 300-year-old oak, but it grows as if it knows. That's the essence of the long now, the 23rd Stoic tactic, where failures shrink to their proper size when viewed through the lens of lifetimes rather than moments. Seneca captured this when he wrote, "Life is like a play. It's not the length but the quality of the acting that matters." Modern CEOs obsess over quarterly earnings. Stoics measured time in seasons of character. Consider the difference between snapping a twig and felling an ancient tree. One crack versus decades of rings. Your most crushing setback today, it's just one ring in the oak of your life. Take Warren Buffett's infamous first business venture, a pinball machine operation that flopped. At 16, he could have labeled himself a failure. Instead, he filed the lesson under long-term education. 50 years later, those broken machines became a footnote in a story spanning billions. or Patricia Bath, the ophthalmologist who faced rejection after rejection for her laser cataract device. While others saw dead ends, she saw decades each no, sharpening her resolve until the patents revolutionized eye surgery. Stoics call this sub specie eternitatis, viewing life under the aspect of eternity. Not to diminish today's stumbles, but to reveal their true scale in a greater narrative. Here's the mental shift. Imagine your life as a biography penned by a future historian. That chapter you're living now, would they title it The Great Defeat or The Turning Point? When Starbucks closed 600 stores in 2008, analysts called it collapse. Howard Schultz saw it as pruning, cutting dead wood to let the strongest branches thrive. A decade later, their stock had quintupled. Growth demands perspective. As Seneca reminded his anxious friend Lucilius, what does it matter how much ground you cover if you're sprinting in circles? Try this exercise today. Grab a blank sheet and sketch 2 columns, a quarterly thinking and decadal wisdom. Under the first, jot immediate reactions to a recent failure, embarrassment, frustration, financial loss. Now switch lenses. In the second column, answer, how might this strengthen my judgment by 2034? What relationships or skills could it nurture over 10 winters? When J.K. Rowling's marriage collapsed, leaving her a broke single mother, she framed her despair as rock bottom became the solid foundation, the necessary void where Harry Potter's world took root. Modern psychology confirms this ancient insight. Studies on temporal distancing show that people who frame setbacks as fleeting scenes in a long movie recover faster and make wiser choices. It's why Elon Musk celebrates SpaceX's early rocket explosions as tuition at the price of eventual Mars landings, or why Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire at war, wrote, "Blame no one." Set things right. The future depends on what you do next. Not next week, next era. Your challenge, plant an acorn today, literally or symbolically. Each time you doubt your path, recall that sapling's invisible timeline. The Japanese practice daisugi offers a stunning metaphor. Centuries-old cedar trees pruned to produce straight shoots without being cut down. Your failures are just such prunings, painful snips guiding growth you can't yet see. So ask Seneca's piercing question. When old age tells your story, will this chapter read as tragedy or necessary friction in the plot? The answer reshapes not just how you fall, but how far you eventually rise. The final Stoic tactic might be the most liberating of all, the power to author the last word on any failure. Epictetus, born into slavery and crippled by a brutal master, discovered this truth early. People are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. In other words, the event itself is neutral. It's the story we wrap around it that stings or strengthens. Centuries later, psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, would crystallize this into logotherapy's core tenet. Between stimulus and response lies the freedom to choose the meaning. A guard could strip Frankl of his clothes, his family, even his name, but they could never confiscate his right to decide what those losses represented. In the camps, he watched some men wither while others found purpose in sharing crusts of bread or scribbling poetry on scraps. The circumstances were identical. The meanings they assigned made all the difference. Consider 2 employees laid off from the same company. One pens a resignation letter to their self-worth. I wasn't good enough. The other drafts a redirection notice. My skills deserve a stage where they'll be valued. Both experienced the same event, only the punctuation marks differ. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies on explanatory style show that people who frame setbacks as temporary, specific, and changeable rebound faster and achieve more than those who default to permanent, pervasive narratives. The Stoics weren't just philosophers, they were early cognitive scientists, recognizing that suffering is often less about the wound and more about the story we stitch around it. Here's how to wield this power. First, isolate the bare facts of your failure. No adjectives, no interpretations, just the forensic details. The company eliminated my position during restructuring is a fact. I failed is a story. Now draft 3 alternate meanings for those facts, as if you're a novelist exploring plot twists. That layoff could mean 1. My talents were underutilized here. 2. This forces me to finally pursue freelance work. 3. I'm being pushed toward a mentor who'll change my trajectory. Suddenly, the event isn't a period, it's a semicolon, a pivot rather than an end. When Thomas Edison's lab burned down in 1914, he didn't call it a tragedy, he called it a liberation from outdated equipment. I'm 67, he told reporters, but not too old to make a fresh start. By morning, he was sketching a more efficient workspace. Try this today. Pick one past failure and rewrite its meaning in ink, not as a fluffy affirmation, but as a deliberate act of narrative sovereignty. A rejected manuscript isn't proof I can't write, it's training for the book that will land. A divorce isn't proof love dies, it's a masterclass in boundaries I'll carry forward. Frankl called this defiant power, the refusal to let external forces dictate internal truths. History's greatest rebounds hinge on this pivot. When Milton Hershey's first candy company went bankrupt, creditors labeled him a failure. He framed it as tuition, applying those hard lessons to create the Hershey bar. When Oprah Winfrey was fired from her first TV job for being too emotional, she didn't mute herself, she amplified the authenticity that would define her empire. As Epictetus put it, circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him to himself. Your closing challenge: the next time life hands you a script you didn't audition for, grab a red pen. Edit relentlessly until the meaning aligns with the future you're building, not the past that tried to define you. Because while you can't control every event, you hold exclusive rights to the final draft, and that's where the real power lies. After exploring these 24 Stoic tactics, they distill into 3 profound meta-themes: perception, action, and purpose, each a lens to transform failure from foe to teacher. First, perception, the Stoic art of reframing. Whether it's the dichotomy of control or cognitive distancing, these tools train you to see setbacks not as personal indictments, but as neutral events awaiting your interpretation. A rejected manuscript isn't proof of inadequacy, it's raw material for refinement. The CEO who misjudges a market trend hasn't failed, she's gathered data for the next pivot. Like a sculptor viewing a block of marble, perception determines whether you see an obstacle or a masterpiece in waiting. Then comes action, the deliberate, focused response. Stoicism isn't passive resignation, it's the disciplined practice of turning analysis into motion. When the premeditation of evils prepares you for worst-case scenarios, or voluntary discomfort hardens your resilience, you're not just thinking like a Stoic, you're moving like one. Consider how Edison's 10,000 failures were actually 10,000 experiments, each one a stepping stone. Or how Oprah's early career stumble became fuel for reinvention. Action is the bridge between "this happened" and "here's what I'll do next." Finally, purpose, the North Star that makes every setback meaningful. Amaphati teaches you to love fate not because it's kind, but because it's shaping you for something greater. When Lincoln lost 8 elections before the presidency, or Mandela endured prison to heal a nation, their struggles gained significance because they were anchored to a vision beyond themselves. Purpose is the alchemy that turns leaden disappointments into golden growth. Failures aren't tombstones marking the end of ambition. They're training grounds where perception sharpens, action solidifies, and purpose deepens. Epictetus, who knew suffering intimately, put it best: freedom isn't secured by filling your purse, but by emptying your demands. True power lies not in controlling life's storms, but in mastering your stance within them. Your challenge: pick one tactic this week, whether it's journaling like Marcus Aurelius or practicing Seneca's flip, and document its impact, not as a homework assignment, but as an excavation of your own resilience. Because the ultimate Stoic truth is this: every stumble holds the potential to reveal a strength you didn't know you had. And that revelation, it's the first step toward a life where failure doesn't frighten you, it fuels you.